This video lesson is a lesson on factoring polynomials in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. When we are looking at a polynomial, the first thing that we're going to consider is we're going to take a look at our last term c, and if it's positive, the binomial factors will have the same sign, because a positive times a positive is a positive, or a negative times a negative is a positive. So our binomial factors will either both be positive, both be negative, and we'll drop in our variables in the front end, and then we need to decide what our other factors are going to be here as our second term. Okay. But again, our binomial factors, if c is positive, will have the same sign. Either both will be positive or both will be negative. If c is negative, the binomial factors will have opposite signs, because a negative is created when we have a product of a negative times a positive. And so these binomial factors would look like this, and we'll, depending on what c is and what our middle term is, will determine our second term of each factor. Because the binomials are creating a product, multiplication is commutative, so it doesn't matter if we put the negative sign in the front or in the back factor. Let's go ahead and look at this polynomial, r squared minus 13r plus 42. It's understood in this polynomial that a is 1. Okay. When we're factoring, the first step that we always ask ourselves is there a greatest common monomial factor that would go into each one of these terms? And in this case, there isn't, other than 1. Another thing that we would ask ourselves, our second question would be, do I recognize any special cases? A special case would involve perfect squares. So we look to our a and see if that's a perfect square, and we look to c. A in this case is a perfect square, however c is not. This really is not a special case, so then we can move on to factoring. The first step then at that point then is to multiply a times c, and in this case 1 times 42 is 42. So that's our target number, and we ask ourselves then, what factors of 42 add up to negative 13? So what factors of a times c add to b? So what factors of 42 in this case add to negative 13? The factors are both going to have the same sign, because c is positive. both of my binomial factors will be positive, or will have the same sign. I apologize. They're going to have the same sign. So they're either going to both be positive or they're going to both be negative. If we look back here, our middle term is negative. So in order to add up to a negative, my signs then for my binomial factors must be both negative. So I'll drop in my variable r. I have my two signs negative, and so now I need to come up with factors of 42 that add up to negative 13. And we know that 6 times 7 is 42, and 6 plus 7 is 13. So my binomial factors are r minus 6 times r minus 7. If we go back and check our work by using FOIL, our first term, r times r, is r squared. Outer r times a negative 7 is a minus 7r. Our inner product, negative 6r. And our last, negative 6 times a negative 7 is a positive 42. And so we get r squared minus 13r plus 42. So it checks, and we factored our binomial correctly. Let's look at another one where a is not equal to 1, and we have a different sign for c. We'll have a negative c. This example is we're going to factor 8x squared minus 36x minus 20. Always ask yourself first, is there a greatest common factor? In this particular case, yes. 4 will go into all three of those terms. So we're going to factor out a 4. And we'll rewrite this polynomial as the product of 4 times 2x squared minus 9x minus 5. And so now we're just going to focus on this trinomial for now. At the very end, we know that our answer will have 4 times 2 binomial factors, and because this last term c is negative, we know that we're going to have opposite signs. Okay? And so we're going to, and we also know that our final answer is going to be multiplied by 4. So this is going to be a little note to myself to know that my final answer will be a product of 4 times 2 binomial factors, and each of those binomial factors, one will have a positive and one will have a negative sign. So how do we get there? Let's look at 2x squared minus 9x minus 5. We're going to do the same first step here, a times c. So that is 2 times negative 5, which is a negative 10. So my target is negative 10. What are my factors of negative 10 that add to negative 9? Or in other words, what are factors of 10 that have a difference of 9? Well, that would be negative 10 times 1 is equal to negative 10, and negative 10 plus 1 is equal to a negative 9. So I'm going to use negative 10 and 9. And there's two methods of factoring, and I'll show you both, and you can decide which method you like best. The first we'll call the box method or the table method. And this is much like working a multiplication table backward. So we are going to go ahead and factor the 2x squared minus 9x minus 5, and we'll place that, organize really our work in a box. So we put our first term up here in this upper left-hand corner, and we put our last term in the lower right-hand corner. The other two boxes are left for our factors of the product A times C, and it doesn't matter which box you place those factors in. So I'm just going to put negative 10x here and a positive 1x here. Now we read our box from top to bottom and from left to right, and we're looking for common factors of each row and each column. 2x squared and 1x have a common factor of x. A negative 10x and a negative 5 have a common factor of negative 5. And then if we read across, 2x squared minus 10x have a common factor of 2x. And our x and a minus 5 have a common factor of 1. So these become my binomial factors. And I'm going to go ahead and I will put those into my parentheses that I had made notation of earlier. So it was an x minus 5 and the 2x plus 1. So this would be my answer. Let's go back to the problem, or to the polynomial 2x squared minus 9x minus 5, and we're going to factor using the rewriting method, or maybe grouping. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use that same target. A times C is negative 10. Find the factors that add up to negative 9. So it's still the negative 10x and the positive 1x. But instead of organizing our work in a table, we're going to organize our work and simply by substituting those factors for negative 9x. So we're going to rewrite 2x squared. Instead of saying minus 9x, we're going to say minus 10x plus 1x, and then minus 5. So all I've done is rewritten the polynomial so it looks different, but it still has the same value. And I'm going to group these then, and I'm going to factor out from these terms a common factor, and I'm going to factor from these terms a common factor. What goes into both 2x squared and minus 10x? Well, 2x. And if I factor that, then I'm left with an x minus 5. And what goes into both a x and a minus 5? 1. So I'm going to factor out 1, and that leaves me with an x minus 5. And so now what I've done is I've found a common factor, and that common factor is x minus 5. So I'm going to take out an x minus 5, and that leaves me with a 2x plus 1. So if we go back to our original, we see that we got to our first answer, we see we got the same answer. We just organized our work in a different way. So our final answer is, again, we have to remember to put in the 4 that we originally factored out at the way beginning times x minus 5 times 2x plus 1.